Whoa, whoa! Hello! Welcome to the perpendicular world. This wonderful Christmas story happened quite recently, when the king of the gnomes learned that in some countries, on Christmas Eve, the wizard Santa Claus flies in and gives gifts to children. And then the king of the gnomes wrote an official letter to Santa Claus, inviting him to visit his kingdom, even promising to throw a feast for him, where various types of cookies and many kinds of milk would be served. Santa Claus received this letter, gladly accepted the invitation, and set off for the kingdom of the gnomes to congratulate the local children for the first time. He arrived in a sleigh, pulled by reindeer, climbed onto the roof of the first house he came across, and jumped down the chimney with his sack of gifts. A gnome's house is much smaller than a human house, but Santa didn't take this into account, so he got stuck in the chimney in such a way that only his head was sticking out of the chimney pipe. "Help! I'm stuck!" Santa shouted and wiggled his short, thick legs. It was Christmas Eve, so there was almost no one outside. However, by a stroke of luck, a gnome named Willy was passing by, who heard the screams and came to find out what was happening. In Willy's hands was a large bottle of sparkling wine, which he wanted to give to his best friend, the gnome Timmy. Willy had a wonderful plan, because it was no ordinary drink. Willy had bought this expensive wine from an old gnome wizard, and whoever drinks this magical wine will be extremely lucky and happy throughout the following year. And so the gnome Willy heard cries for help, climbed onto the roof of the house from where they were coming, and discovered Santa Claus stuck in the chimney. "Pull me out!" Santa shouted.
"I can't,"
the gnome replied.
"I'm too small, but I can try to push you into the chimney so you can get out of the fireplace inside the house."
"Okay, try," said Santa, and the gnome got to work. He pushed Santa's head into the chimney with his little hands, jumped on it like cowboys ride in a rodeo, and even shoved it into the chimney pipe with his foot. Santa's head disappeared into the chimney pipe, but that's where his downward movement ended. He was completely stuck. Meanwhile, the gnome was exhausted and sat down to rest on the roof. "Hurry up! Christmas is almost here!" Santa shouted from the chimney.
"I have no strength left, but I'll bring someone to help,"
the gnome replied. Willy slid down from the roof like on an ice slide and knocked on the door of the house. Loud music was playing in the house. It was fun and noisy. The owner of the house and their guests met him at the doorstep. They were all gnomes too. They warmly welcomed Willy and were very happy about his bottle of sparkling wine. Before Willy could say a word, the homeowner took the bottle, skillfully opened it, and began pouring the wine into glasses. Willy tried to say that this unusual wine was intended for his friend, but he was too modest and shy, and the music was too loud, and no one listened to him. The homeowner handed out glasses to everyone, and Willy didn't even notice how he himself was standing with wine in his hand. The wine had an amazing aroma. In the end, Willy resigned himself.
"Okay, let all these guys be lucky and happy next year,"
Willy thought and drank with everyone. He was so engrossed in everything that was happening that he completely forgot about Santa Claus. Everyone continued to have fun, drink, and dance, and the fat gnome nicknamed Cotton Candy started breakdancing, but he spun around on his head too much, which caused him to break two windows with his feet, knock over the Christmas tree, get tangled in the garland, and get electrocuted. It was a funny sight, so everyone laughed long and loud, and then everyone went outside to set off fireworks. After the fireworks were over, the gnomes were already heading home when they suddenly heard a muffled scream. "Help! help! Willie immediately remembered why he had knocked on the door and told everyone what had happened to Santa Claus. The gnomes immediately climbed onto the roof and approached the chimney.
Don't worry, sir. We will help you now,
said the homeowner. He was a respected gnome named Anvil, but as soon as Anvil uttered these words, something strange began to happen to everyone. The gnomes' bodies and faces would shrink and swell as if some bubbles were inflating under their skin. This went on for some time, and then suddenly they all started uncontrollably vomiting on each other in huge fountains of bright green liquid. This continued for about a minute, and when silence fell, the gnomes wiped the vomit from their faces. Their mouths were stretched into wide smiles, and their eyes gleamed mysteriously. Poor gnome Willie. He had no idea that the old foolish wizard had mixed up the bottles and accidentally sold him a potion of toxic anger and moral decay. And it had begun to take effect.
I told my wife, never cook stale turkey,
said the homeowner and laughed at his own joke alone. Willie walked right up to the chimney, looked inside and said,
"Be patient, sir. I have an idea. You need to be lubricated so you can slide down the chimney more easily."
He climbed to the top of the chimney, unzipped his fly, and began to piss on Santa Claus' face and head.
"Here is your lubrication, Santa. I'll grease you up properly."
While Willie was peeing, Santa was choking on the urine and coughing, and all the other gnomes were clutching their stomachs with laughter.
"No, gentlemen, this is not good," said Anvil. "We must help the old man,"
he added, and brought a glass of thick, greenish-brown mucus to Santa's mouth.
"Drink it,"
he said to Santa Claus.
"This magic potion tastes terrible, but it will temporarily reduce your size, and you will easily get out of the chimney."
"Okay, thank you," said Santa Claus, and began to drink in small sips from the glass that the gnome was holding. It was clear from his face that the drink tasted simply disgusting. When the glass was empty, the gnome put it in his jacket pocket and asked,
"Well, do you already feel yourself shrinking?"
"It seems so," Santa replied happily.
"Wow! I couldn't even imagine that my snot had such wonderful properties,"
said Anvil, and the silence of Christmas night was broken by the loud laughter of the gnomes. But the general merriment was interrupted by the words of one of the gnomes named Stone Lover. "Quiet!" he shouted, and everyone fell silent.
"This is no longer funny. We have crossed the line. We must help Santa,"
he said, and approached the chimney. He bent down and pulled a long white beard out of the chimney.
"Now we will get you out, old man,"
said Stone Lover, and began to pull on the beard. The other gnomes joined him. "Oh no, my beard! I've been growing it for 200 years!" Santa shouted, but this only made the gnomes smile. They continued to pull on the beard, and Santa continued to scream in pain.
"Look, I'm a dump truck!"
shouted Stone Lover and climbed to the top of the chimney. And while Santa was shouting, Stone Lover shit into his mouth. All the gnomes started laughing so hard that their stomachs hurt. The homeowner ran off somewhere, but soon returned with a hand winch.
"Stone Lover, if you're a dump truck, then I'm a tow truck,"
said the homeowner, and began winding Santa's beard onto the winch drum. There was a loud crack, and Anvil rolled off the roof along with the turn-off beard. Old bald gnome Charlie put the turn-off beard on his head, looked in a mirror and said, that it was now his wag. Meanwhile, Santa continued to shout, and the homeowner climbed onto the roof again and onto the chimney.
I'm not a tow truck anymore. I'm a dump truck too,
He said, quickly took off his pants and shit into Santa's mouth. Everyone burst into laughter. Santa tried to spit out the shit, but the gnome pushed it back in with his little shoe. "Damn gnomes, I hate you!" shouted Santa, but this only amused everyone. Meanwhile, Willy was already doing something in the fireplace inside the house.
Look, I'm a Tarzan,
He shouted and began swinging on a rope right in the fireplace. I am checking if I can pull him out of the chimney by his balls. After these words, all the gnomes burst into laughter, and Willy jumped down and began swinging the rope and pulling it in different directions, as if he were ringing a bell. This sight made everyone laugh even harder.
I've got an idea,
Shouted Willy and climbed out the window with the end of the rope. He tied the rope to an old little gnome tractor that was standing in the yard, got behind the wheel and pressed the gas pedal. The rope tightened and the screams in the chimney intensified, while the little tractor spun its wheels in the dazzling white Christmas snow. Suddenly there was a crack, and the tractor moved forward, dragging Santa's severed balls behind it on the rope. Old Bald Gnome Charlie grabbed the balls, put them on his head, looked in the mirror, and said that now it was his wag. Meanwhile, a gnome nicknamed Third Leg approached the fireplace. He looked up the chimney and shouted,
Don't worry, Santa, I'm the only sane one here. I'll help you get out.
As soon as the gnome said this, he began to climb up the chimney. Santa continued to scream. Soot fell from the chimney, and strange sounds were coming from the fireplace. After 15 minutes, the gnome climbed down the chimney, came out of the fireplace, lay down on the sofa, and lit a cigarette.
Done,
He said.
What's done?
Someone from the crowd asked.
Did you get Santa out? No,
The gnome replied.
I fracked him.
He laughed loudly, and everyone else laughed after him. Someone even fell to the floor laughing. After a while, the respected gnome named Coalbeard stepped into the center of the room and said with a serious face,
Okay, guys, stop making fun of the old man. He's our guest, and we are obligated to help him. But first, I suggest we wish him a Merry Christmas. Hey, Santa, what do you want for Christmas?
Coalbeard asked. I want you to die, Santa replied from the chimney.
What? You've always wanted to learn to fly? Okay, we can help you,
said Coalbeard, smiled broadly, and raised a bundle of dynamite above his head.
You will soar like a bird. Now I'll fill your rocket shaft with fuel,
he said, and climbed into the chimney. No, not in this, Santa Claus shouted, but the gnome couldn't be stopped. A few moments later, Coalbeard returned from the chimney, covered in soot and looking pleased. In his hands he held a fuse.
Merry Christmas, Santa,
he shouted, and lit the fuse with his cigar, which he constantly smoked.
Now Santa will fly like a rocket,
he said and laughed. But Santa didn't fly like a rocket, because Coalbeard had put too much explosives in his ass. Instead, a powerful explosion rocked the gnome kingdom, and Santa's remains were scattered in all directions for many miles. Everyone was blown to pieces in this terrible explosion. Only the gnome Willy survived, because at that moment he had just gone outside and sat down behind the house to shit. In winter, Willy liked to shit outside and wipe his ass with snow. Detective Yellow Bean immediately arrived at the scene. He's called that because he's a bean, and he's also yellow. Detective Yellowbean knew everything about crime, because in his youth he was a criminal. But he really wanted to become a detective, so he stole Hercule Poirot's mustache and Lieutenant Columbo's mysterious gaze and went to work for the police. The detective questioned the gnome Willy and reported the incident directly to the King of the Gnomes. This incident could cause a great stir in the world, because it's not every day that a kind wizard who brings gifts to children explodes in a chimney because someone put dynamite up his ass in your kingdom. The King of the Gnomes listened to the detective and immediately convened a council of elders. At this council, it was decided to contact the scholar gnome Victor, who in his youth had studied life and death. And according to old entries in his diary, he had once even managed to revive 2 dead beetles. He was the one who could help the King of the Gnomes avoid disgrace and reputational damage at this moment. After all, if Santa Claus could be revived, this unpleasant incident could be hushed up with gold. The only problem was that Victor was already 98 years old, and he was in a local psychiatric hospital, where he was being treated for dementia and a variety of mental illnesses. But there was no choice. Action had to be taken as soon as possible. At Victor's request, the gnomes immediately began building a secret laboratory somewhere in the mountains, which cost half of the royal treasury, and a royal decree was issued stating that every gnome was obliged to urgently go in search of pieces of Santa Claus and bring them to the royal castle. But many inhabitants of the gnome kingdom were poorly educated, so they didn't fully understand what was required of them. Among the pieces of Santa Claus brought in, some rather strange things could be found: a dead cat, a bag of pine cones, and much more. Someone even brought a recording of the howling wind and the sounds of a pig giving birth. When all the fragments of Santa Claus were collected, they were taken to the secret laboratory. Victor worked alone and didn't allow anyone to enter the laboratory. He connected the pieces of Santa Claus one by one, and finally everything was ready for the next stage. Victor placed Santa Claus in an iron box, placed this box on top of the mountain, and began to wait for a thunderstorm. As the storm approached, the Gnome King personally traveled to the mountain top to see everything with his own eyes. Everyone was in anticipation. Finally, a storm cloud hung over the mountain, lightning flashed in the sky, and one of the bolts struck the iron box. After that, the box trembled from the blows. Its Santa was trying to get out. The King of the Gnomes laughed joyfully and clapped his hands. "He's alive!" Victor shouted and ran to the box to help Santa Claus get out. But Santa got out himself. After another blow, the door flew off and fell to the ground, and thick white smoke began to stream from the darkness of the box. It smelled of urine and gasoline, and something huge in a tattered red suit jumped out. The suit was so tattered that it seemed as if it consisted mostly of holes connected by scraps of fabric.
Oh my god, Victor! You are an old blind idiot! What have you done to Santa Claus? This is some kind of monster!
The King of the Gnomes shouted, began to back away, stumbled, fell, and burst into tears of fear. The creature's body consisted of hundreds of pieces, sewn together with cursed thread. But for some reason, the pieces of flesh were sewn with the skin inward, and red meat protruded from the outside. Instead of right leg, a dog was sewn on, and instead of a left arm, a running chainsaw protruded from the elbow. Instead of Santa's head, a small chicken head was crookedly sewn on. Instead of balls, someone's eyes were sewn between its legs. And instead of cock, a dead cat dangled. "Santa, I'm your father!" Victor shouted and wanted to cut off the creature's arm, but found nothing suitable in his pockets. "Father, feed me milk from your tit," the creature said, stroking its cock. "I will not do it, my son. I'm afraid of you. You are a real monster. I want you to die as soon as possible," Victor replied, crying, covering his ears with his hands and running to hide behind a huge stone. The creature burst into tears and began to scream into the black sky. "Oh no, father! You have disowned me! This is so painful! I feel resentment and loneliness. You betrayed me. Now I will take out my anger on everyone around me. I will rape all the gnomes in this kingdom, and then I will come for you," the creature said, pointing a finger at Victor and the king. "And then I will continue to do this in other kingdoms, and I will take you with me into slavery and force you to suck my teeth every evening. Santa Claus no longer exists. Call me Santa Claus. I will turn your life into real hell," the creature added, and disappeared into the darkness of the night with one big jump.
"We only have one chance for normal life, Victor,"
said the king of the gnomes, who was in hysterics.
"We urgently need to ask for help from the almighty sorcerer who lives in the magic kingdom. He can definitely save us, but for that we will have to negotiate with the king of the magic kingdom, whom this sorcerer serves. We don't have time to get horses. We need to set off right now. I'm the king, therefore you will carry me on your neck."
"It's a very long walk to the magic kingdom," said Victor. "I saw a dead horse not far from here. I could put it in iron box and—"
"No!"
the king interrupted him.
"From this moment on, I forbid you to resurrect anyone."
The king of the gnomes sat on Victor's neck, and the heroes set off on their journey. The road was long and dangerous, and the king was lazy and afraid of wolves. Therefore, he didn't get off Victor's neck to go to the toilet. He pissed and shit on his neck. On the one hand, Victor didn't like this very much, but on the other hand, his neck was always warm, and he had just forgotten his scarf at home. A few hours later, the heroes arrived in the magical kingdom and immediately went to an audience with the king and told him about their troubles. The king of the magical kingdom agreed to help them and issue a permit to use the services of a sorcerer, but set several conditions. The king of the gnomes had to kiss his balls and give him half of the kingdom treasury. The king of the gnomes was forced to agree to these conditions to save his life. After signing the agreement, he kissed the smelly royal balls and asked,
"Where can we find the sorcerer?"
He smelled terribly of shit, and it wasn't his own shit. This annoyed me very much, but I was too embarrassed to tell him to his face, so I had to sell him into sexual slavery to the king of the bandits, but only for 1 weekend. The king replied, "You can find him in the dangerous forest near the castle." And our heroes set off on their journey. Victor walked on foot, while the king of the gnomes sat on his neck and ate baked beans from a clay pot, which made him constantly fart. After a couple of hours, our heroes reached the dangerous forest and immediately had an audience with the king of the bandits, who was leisurely sitting on a throne in the middle of the forest, eating bear fat from a jar with his hands and drinking sour milk. "What do you want, stupid idiot," he asked, and spat in the king's face with saliva, snot, and remnants of sour milk.
"We need a sorcerer,"
the Gnome King replied, and told him everything that had happened. "I can't just give you the sorcerer. I paid for him. I bought him for this weekend. If I give him to you, I will not have anyone to have sex with. The only thing that can make me change my mind is a chest of gold," said the Bandit King.
"My treasury is already empty. I don't have a chest of gold, but I can leave you Victor. You can make love to him as much as you want. He was really handsome in his youth."
Victor cast a venomous glance at his companion. The Bandit King looked at Victor contemptuously and said, "No, he is too old, and he stinks. His whole back is covered in shit. But I really like you, handsome king. Okay, so be it. I'll be waiting for you at my palace." He stood up and went to a dilapidated hut nearby.
"Can I just kiss your balls?"
asked the Gnome King. "No, shut up and follow me." Victor giggled, and the Gnome King slowly walked towards the hut and disappeared inside, from where his heart-rending screams soon began to be heard. 3 hours later, the two kings came out of the hut.
"I fulfilled my part of the agreement. Now tell me, where is the sorcerer?"
asked the Gnome King. "I don't know. He ran away," replied the Bandit King.
"But we had the agreement!"
shouted the Gnome King. The King of Bandit laughed and said, "You should see your face right now! Okay, I was just kidding. I am the sorcerer." He snapped his fingers and instantly transformed into his true form. Even the strange medieval clothes turned into a black cloak and a black hat. The cloak, however, was very dirty and smelled of shit.
"Where is the Bandit King then?"
asked the King of the Gnomes. "He is sleeping in the hut. I cast a sleeping spell on him yesterday."
"I'll have to execute you,"
said the King of the Gnomes. "For what?" asked the sorcerer.
"Of course, for what you did to me in the hut,"
replied the King of the Gnomes. "Ah, you mean that?" said the sorcerer and smiled. "Sorry, I couldn't resist. It was just a joke. But don't worry, nobody will find out. Let's consider this payment for my services. It's time," said the sorcerer, and the heroes set off for the kingdom of the gnomes. They walked for several hours, and along the way the sorcerer brewed a potion that needed to be poured on the monster during the full moon to return it to its original form. The sorcerer's beautiful cloak had no pockets, so he entrusted the potion to Victor. The heroes waited for the full moon, and under the cover of night entered the kingdom of the gnomes. A deadly silence reigned in the city streets. But when they reached the main square, they saw that all the inhabitants of the kingdom were locked in iron cages that stood around the perimeter of square. "We were just waiting for you. Welcome to our lovely celebration," a voice rang out from behind our heroes. They turned around and saw that the monster was approaching them. "And here is a little gift for you, as promised," said Santa Claus, and squeezed what was dangling between his legs.
"We are not afraid of you, you dumb animal! Come here! I fucked your mom!"
shouted the King of the Gnomes. "Victor, get out the potion and throw it at the monster," said the sorcerer. Victor took an empty vial from his bag and looked guiltily at the sorcerer.
"What does this mean, Victor?"
asked the King of the Gnomes. "I'm sorry, my king," Victor replied. "It smelled so delicious."
"Victor, you old idiot!"
the King of the Gnomes managed to say. At this moment, the sorcerer transformed into a mighty raven and disappeared into the sky. But the remaining heroes were less fortunate. The monster caught them and brought them to the center of the square, where he first tripped the king for 3 hours, straight in front of the entire kingdom. Then he grabbed Victor by the throat, lifted him above himself, and began to strangle him. Out of the fear, Victor peed himself, and the urine began to drop onto the monster. "Oh no! What are you doing to me?" the creature shrieked. The monster's body began to hiss like a hot pan. Smoke rose from it, and the next second, the monster turned into a huge pile of shit and collapsed to the ground. "The potion worked! It was contained in my urine!" "I figured that out because I'm a scientist," said Victor. "Victor, you are a moron!" the king said to him. Suddenly, a pile of shit began to stir, and Santa Claus emerged from it. "Ho ho ho!" he shouted, and a team of magical reindeer descended from the sky. The naked Santa Claus climbed into the sleigh and prepared to take off. "Santa!" shouted the king of the gnomes, standing on all fours without his pants.
"I'm sorry it turned out this way. Be sure to come back next year."
"Go to hell, you asshole! I hate gnomes! May you all die!" shouted Santa Claus and disappeared into the night sky.
The end.
Not quite. It is said that because the urine contained an insufficient amount of the potion, it didn't work properly and evil wasn't completely defeated. And therefore, once a year, Santa Claus transforms into Santa Hellas and flies to the kingdom of the gnomes to wish a Merry Christmas to all the inhabitants he meets on the streets.
I can't quite understand. What's on TV?
Probably a black hole or a singularity. Time has stopped on our TV.
Don't pretend you're smart. You don't understand anything about this.
I do. Shut up and keep eating shit.
I'm not eating shit.
Really? Then why is your mouth always brown? And why does it constantly smell of shit?
A fly ate the shit and then kissed me.
Oh, and does the fly do that 3 times a day?
Yes, a really strange fly. It constantly eats poop and then it kisses me.
But why doesn't it kiss me then?
Of course, because you're ugly.
I'm ugly? Yesterday I received an award for being the most handsome show host.
Really? And who gave you this award? The Association of Fat Writers.
No! Many people. The magazine The Most Beautiful People on the Planet, for example. My photo was on the front page.
I don't believe you. I've never heard of such a magazine. It doesn't exist.
It does exist. It's just that this magazine isn't shown to ugly people like you, so as not to offend them. Thanks for watching. My name is Old Jack, and this is my assistant, the dumb homunculus Kafka. You guys aren't dumb. That's why I love you. Good night.